of it, or else they might contain a piece of wood or a stone or even a fragment of a human body part, but wrapped up to look as if it actually is whatever creature is supposed to be being offered.
No one would know what was really inside.
On the whole, the better wrapped and the more beautiful the exterior of a mummy, the more likely it is that inside there's going to be a fake, because it's almost as if the priest was saying, oof, we're feeling really guilty, now we have to make it look perfect, because inside it is imperfect, so at least the exterior must be a manifestation of what it's supposed to be.
Still, there is ambiguity in the deception.
For the priests, certainly, they could hold these two ideas in their minds at the same time, not really feel terribly fraudulent about it. But I think if the pilgrims had really known they didn't have crocodiles inside their pseudo-crocodile mummies, they would have been quite upset.
100 years ago, the American explorer Henry Wellcome discovered a perfectly preserved example of a mummified crocodile. One he believed to be a fake. But is it? The specimen is kept at the Egypt Center of Swansea University in Britain.
We do have whole live crocodiles that have been mummified, but on the other hand we also have an awful lot of fakes.
Veterinary surgeon Emma Littler has been called in to look inside this ancient relic using an X-ray machine. For the first time in 2,000 years, the crocodile mummy will give up its secret. We will know what is inside it.
So we can know once and for all, hopefully, whether or not there was a real crocodile in there or whether it is just a bag of sand.
And what we see is
there is definitely something in there.
Absolutely
really clear.
There we are. So you can see here the outline of the head, and this is just the first two sections, so it's actually embedded in, well, it's inside the first two sections.
From about there, does it?
Yeah, that's right. And there's nothing in this. There's a couple of ways. There's nothing in the tail.
This remarkable artifact does indeed contain the remains of a crocodile that once swam the waterways of ancient Egypt over 2,000 years ago. It is not a fake, but a genuine messenger to the gods. This discovery reveals the lengths that man will go to perform rituals of death. To capture and mummify dangerous beasts as well as allowing them to roam freely in a sacred temple demonstrates the ancients' reverence toward death. Next, Ancient Discoveries uses forensic science to examine the roles of other animals as messengers of death. It involves murder and some bizarre detective work. To the naked eye, these 5 sickles appear identical. But 800 years ago, a Chinese super cop named Sung Si invented an ingenious way of telling which had been used in a murder.
We may owe our understanding of crime scene investigation to Sung Si.
Sung Si wrote down his ideas in an ancient text that brought science for the first time into criminal investigation. David Hughes, a modern crime scene investigator, has been studying the ancient evidence.
I think one could call Sung Si the great-great-grandfather of modern forensics, because he actually wrote some information, as we know, in The Washing Away of Wrongs.
The Washing Away of Wrongs is an 800-year-old text that describes ancient forensic detective work.
Before his time, several books had been written which touched on questions of forensic medicine, but he was the first to systematize them and produce a work which brought together the body of knowledge which had been accumulating.
This is the first written record of the instructions to scene investigators to actually go out to what to look for at scenes.
In that sense, he could be described as the father of modern forensic science.
Following the account in Sung Si's book, Ancient Discoveries will reconstruct how he solved the case of a brutal murder 800 years ago. In around 1230 AD, the inhabitants of a remote Chinese village were shocked to discover one of them had been murdered with an unidentified blade. There were no witnesses, and in those days, no police force to call in.
Most of the minor legal cases were tried by village headmen who effectively were conscripted into the job. They were not paid, and their work quite often involved a lot of expenditure and probably making themselves unpopular among the people they had to live with.
The village head man appealed to the state capital for help.
Members of Song Zi's class were scholars who had reached their position through successfully passing the examinations, and it was their responsibility to oversee this somewhat chaotic system and to act as intermediaries between the village officials and the imperial court.
Song Si was sent to the village to investigate.
People like Song Zi would have travelled around the country investigating particularly difficult cases, either from a technical point of view or because there were powerful interests involved.
With no evidence and no witnesses, the murderer must have felt he had nothing to fear from a visiting scholar.
From his own account of the cases he was involved in, he seems to have operated as some sort of super detective who was called in to deal with these particularly difficult cases.
Song Si's first task was to identify the murder weapon. He knew from practical research that different blades produced different types of wounds. Song Si's examination of the body showed a ragged gash with specific characteristics. Ancient historian Mai Trao reenacts how Song Si might have tackled his investigation. Mai uses the carcass of a pig purchased from the local butcher shop.
This is the first one. This is the 16th century broadsword, and as you can see, it has left that kind of cut. This is our stabbing wound. You can tell up to a point, but only up to a point, the size of that blade. It didn't go in very far, so we don't know how long it was. Now look at the damage done by the sickle. It is absolutely horrendous. It has gouged through the skin and through the tissue beneath. It could actually have gone through bone as well.
Different blades cause very different wounds.
So it's possible for a forensic scientist, and it was possible for Sun Qi in the 13th century to know what had caused this wound. A sickle did it. The only problem is that there were thousands of sickles in medieval China. Which one was he looking for?
A sickle was a common tool in the rural communities of ancient China. Song Si summoned every villager to appear before him and ordered them to bring their sickles. Over 200 cleaned and polished sickles were presented to him. How was Song Si to know which sickle was the murder weapon?
In reality, it's very difficult to completely clean an object. Even when somebody thinks they've cleaned off a murder weapon, inevitably there are going to still be specks of material left on there.
Today, forensic scientists would use microscopic analysis to trace these minute scraps of evidence. But in 13th century China, Song Si did not have such technical resources. Instead, he deputized thousands of tiny investigators. Blowflies. Mai is joined by forensic scientist Amaret Whitaker as they attempt to solve Song Si's case 800 years after the crime was committed. Song Si placed all the sickles in the sun and waited. Mai wipes animal blood from a butcher's on the blade.
Over the cutting edge of the weapon, the business end. Now, any murderer worth his salt would realize there is blood on this weapon and he wants to get rid of it. So what does he do? He takes a rag and he wipes it. We're going to place the murder weapon inside this case, like so, with the others in the series. And to the naked eye, they all look identical. Now, we'll see what the flies can tell us.
Yeah, what we're hoping is that the flies will find the one out of these 5 sickles which has got the blood on it.
Within minutes, flies make straight for the bloody sickle.
Oh, look, we've got one. Look at that. Yes, yes, yes.
Song Si was right. Ultra-macro photography reveals the secret of the tiny detectives.
If there are traces of blood or tissue on something like a knife or a sickle, then certainly the flies are going to be attracted to that rather than to other knives which have no blood on them.
He's having a jolly good feast there by the look of it.
Microscopic fragments of blood and tissue remain trapped in imperfections in the metal.
Seen with the naked eye, there's no way to tell whether this sickle has been used in a murder. However, if we change to the scale of a blowfly, then the world becomes a very different place. Suddenly the blade doesn't appear quite so smooth. These imperfections trap particles of blood and tissue, and these stand out to the blowfly like neon fast food signs indicating a good meal. Even if the flies can't see the particles, they can rely on another sense, the sense of smell. Tiny particles are breaking off and atomizing and spreading through the air. And these particles activate receptors on the blowfly. It's almost as if they can see the smell.
In the confines of the 13th century, we would certainly be suggesting that this was a case of murder, looking at the evidence.
The victims spoke from beyond the grave via these miniature messengers of death. Forensic detection took another step into the modern era. The study of insects remains an important part of modern CSI. It is known as forensic entomology.
I think certainly anybody that works in the area of forensic entomology who's interested would know about that case. It's certainly cited in a lot of papers and every interview that's ever given about forensic entomology. So yes, it's very important. As far as I know, it's the first properly documented case where forensic entomology was specifically used to solve a crime.
We may owe our understanding of crime scene investigation to Sung Si.
The rituals and practices surrounding death have all developed in response to human need. In Sung Si's murder cases, the need was to receive information from the dead. Christians search for spiritual salvation through the cross. Ancient Egyptians sent animal envoys to lobby the gods directly. But in 3rd century BC China, they went one step further. They used technology to create the afterlife, right here on Earth. In the 3rd century BC, Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China, built an extraordinary tomb in which to enjoy eternity. An ancient text written by the first historian of China, Sima Qian, tells of rivers of mercury flowing like water inside Qin's mausoleum. Ancient Discoveries is investigating the purpose and engineering behind this strange discovery.
In 220 BC, the country had been at war for about 500 years. It started out with some 700 independent states, and by 221 they'd been whittled down to one, which was the state of Qin.
Qin created a nation that has lasted 2,000 years.
Qin was so successful in its career of conquest that it has become synonymous with the whole of China today.
A 10,000 square mile empire, wealthy and powerful beyond imagination. Qin was terrified of losing his throne, and even more terrified of dying. He wanted his life and power to last for all eternity. So he searched the known world for the secret of eternal life.
He was constantly sending emissaries off to far corners of the globe to find potions or wise men who could help him with this.
Fearful of being executed if they came back empty-handed, no one returned. As if expecting the search for the elixir of eternal life to fail, Qin embarked on an equally ambitious project, one whose many mysteries lie untapped to this day.
But at the same time, as soon as he came to the throne, he set hundreds of thousands of convicts to work on building a tomb for himself.
I myself find a bit of a paradox here, because if you're never going to die, what do you need a mausoleum for?
He was hedging his bets. If he could not have eternal life, he would rule forever in death.
The reason why he built that mausoleum was partly because he needed that kingdom, that rather empire. He needed his resources, he needed his palace, he needed his warriors, he needed his servants and everything else to continue ruling in the afterlife.
In the south of his empire, he built a mausoleum complex over an area of 56 square miles.
There are obviously many things about the Emperor Qin's mausoleum that are fascinating, but if I had to single out one thing, it would probably be the sheer scale of the site. Everything is so massive, everything you could possibly imagine, or even things that you would never imagine that were going to be there. Not only they are there, but they are multiplied by 100 or by 1,000.
It is not simply a mausoleum.